But this morning, I invited her to the movies, and she said,
Okay.
seriously? Hold on one second.
We are talking the 4:30 movie, and this is written and directed by Kevin Smith, his latest comedy, and is a throwback movie to the 80s, taking place in 1986. It's a kind of comedy romp about three movie buff friends who are going to the movies. One of them, our main character, is kind of lined up this date with the kind of the girl of his dreams, and it's about primarily, I suppose, this kind of group of friends and their relationships as they kind of like sneak into kind of different cinema showings of different films, and then this kind of budding romance and how that kind of complicates the relationship with our main guy's friendship group. All the meantime, we get lots of kind of cameos and regular faces from Kevin Smith movies, and even a couple of kind of like trailers that are kind of made up for this movie, like fake trailers and things. So let's talk about what works in this movie. So I think this is kind of a fun approximation of the 80s. Kevin Smith, obviously a big fan of cinema of that kind of era, and clearly his passion for it is there to sort of see on screen. And yeah, I think there are some elements here that do sort of feel like a kind of 80s throwback. I mean, we had lots of kind of screwball sex comedies kind of coming out of the 80s, and they, you know, you had the American Pie films kind of more recently than that, but it's kind of shunned away from now because obviously this day and age it's seen as a bit inappropriate. And although I wouldn't maybe say this movie goes as far as they did, there is elements of that kind of screwball sort of sex kind of comedy that we did have in the 80s. So it does have that kind of 80s feel. What I think the movie's trying to do is capture that kind of fever of that movie fans would have, and the way they could have discussed things and things like this into minute detail and stuff like that. And obviously the whole point about you know, skipping movies and kind of going in, you know, you pay for one and then you finish it and go into another one. I don't think we really do that as much here in the UK, if I'm honest. It's probably more of an American thing, but again, it's that kind of culture and that sort of farcical sort of caper where they're trying to get away from this kind of manager played by Jeong, who is kind of our, I guess, antagonist to a sort of certain degree. So there's some fun elements. Some of the jokes are kind of quite funny. Some of them kind of relate to kind of film humour. Some of them are more broad. Humour is subjective, and I'm going to come on to the humour again in just a bit, believe. And but it, you know, some of the jokes are kind of you know, were kind of funny, and you know, it's very reminiscent of the stylings of Kevin Smith, in particular his kind of more recent films. But you can see elements of kind of Clerks and things in there. Let's talk about what didn't work. I mean, I have to be honest with you, I didn't particularly like this movie. I thought, again, humour is subjective, but for me a lot of the jokes didn't land, and a lot of them were just, they just kept the camera rolling just too long. There's a gag in Family Guy where they draw jokes out to be sort of uncomfortable, and I wondered if is this meant to be like cringe humour? Are we meant to be like cringing as the audience because the joke is just going on and kind of like making it kind of feel uncomfortable? But I don't think it was. I think it's they genuinely thought, oh, this is going to be funny. It isn't. Not, at least in my opinion. There's lots of jokes here which I didn't feel were particularly funny, or they just outstayed their welcome by a long way. The actual story itself, I think could have had more to it. It's not particularly a deep story, and I was kind of waiting for a little bit more plot to kind of happen. And I knew nothing about this film. In actual fact, I didn't even know I was going to see this film. We saw a mystery movie, and it was this. But yeah, I was kind of just waiting for really some type of plot element, but it's just a very light comedy. The thing, I guess, that I suppose made me feel this movie really didn't have any connection for me were the characters. I did not feel the characters were A, particularly likeable, B, particularly interesting, and C, not particularly well played. I think the acting seemed, and it's a comedy movie, I get it, so we're not necessarily expecting high calibre acting, but I just didn't feel the actors were particularly strong, even in a comedic performance. The characters just seemed to kind of like bicker and argue, and some of the conversations, to me, it felt like the script was just trying too hard. And I had this in my mind for the whole movie, but the film just feels like it's just trying too hard. I just think it comes across as insincere. Yeah, and the characters ultimately, I just thought they were kind of just annoying, if I'm honest. I didn't really feel like the connection between the kind of the romance was particularly kind of strong, and then the relationship between your friends as well. I mean, there's one guy who really there's two that I think are going to be brothers, and there's other one who just feels like he's like would be in a completely different kind of friendship group if he was so far removed from the other two. Yeah, I have to be honest with you. The recent run of Kevin Smith movies have not been strong. And I'm sad to say this continues in that kind of tradition, really. Disappointing. Again, comedy is subjective, so some people might find this hilarious. They really might. When I saw this with a friend of mine, and he didn't like it at all. But yeah, it was a miss for me. But it was, you know, it's well shot, and I should say it captures some elements that I think some people might enjoy as a sort of a throwback. It's an okay put together film. It just didn't land. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing it next time.